welcome back to my channel, Planty Princess 92. My name is Ashley, and in today's video I wanted to repot a couple plants and also add a few cuttings that I propagated in water back into the top of some of my pothos. I have a tiny little really sad cutting of a string of bananas that I'm going to put in to the top of the little plant that I have going here from other propagations. And then I have a couple other pothos and philodendron that I want to pot up into leca. So we'll get right into it. As I go on, I'll explain to you how I propagated, where I cut it, the method of propagation that I used, and then you'll join me and you'll see how I potted up and what I used to pot each plant up. I also have a little purple Tradescantia. I believe this one's called Tradescantia zebrina, or the Wandering Jew. Now all these are relatively easy care plants, and I'll go through that as well. I think we'll start with the Pothos Marble Queen. So I have a plant here that I have started. And these I started with water propagations from my mother plant. And I wanted to add a couple more into the top of this to make it a little bit more fuller and give it a couple more strands that will eventually be hanging down over the edges. As you can see right now, it does have a little yellow tint to it, and it almost looks as if it's more of the golden pothos. That's because I left this in water a little longer than I should have. So it started to kind of yellow out, but when I pot it back into the soil, it will then put out some new growth, and it will look just as it's supposed to. Pothos are really easy to propagate. Now, one thing real quick, I am not going to be using this only because I do not have any here, but when I water propagate and I plant then into soil, a thing that I like to use most of the time is called micronizal inoculant. That really helps bond the roots with the soil, because when you grow cuttings into water, they're different type of roots than what grow in soil. So that just kind of helps them bond without the soil kind of just being too harsh and drying up the roots, and it helps the roots be able to better adjust to life in soil. So that's a great product to buy if you guys are interested. I believe it's by Extreme Gardening. I will link that in the description below, but it is a very great product to use. Now, cuttings, when you propagate from water, you do want to keep them a little more moist than usual for the first week or so, but use your discretion, because again, they're used to being fully in water, so you do want to keep the soil on the moist side, but not moist enough that if you are planting into other cuttings that you're going to then yellow your other plant. So just be mindful of that. I like to use a spoon when I'm potting in smaller pots, because sometimes a shovel is just too big. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to dig a little hole where my roots will fit. And then I will stick this cutting right in. And this one's going to be a little hard since the roots are so lengthy, but I'm just going to put them in, and they will spread out as they grow, and they'll find their way around the pot. Now, when I first potted up these cuttings that are here, they actually looked just like this one, and they actually started to look a little worse. A lot of the bottom leaves started to die as new growth was coming out. So because new growth was coming out, I wasn't worried. But don't be shocked when you pot in soil a cutting that you propagated in water, because a lot of the times it will bring them into shock. So that brings me to another great product you can use when watering them after you pot up a cutting that was water propagated, is Super Thrive, because that helps the transplant shock tremendously. But anyways, when you, I forget what I was saying. I don't remember. But you catch my drift. Oh, the plant. If it starts to die off a little bit, as long as you're seeing new growth, don't be alarmed, because that's perfectly normal. The old growth will, you know, fade out, and then new healthy growth will come in as it's adjusting to its new life in soil. So now that I have that, I will top it off with a little bit of fresh soil. Normally for this, I would mix in some perlite, but because I'm just putting it on the top, the majority of the soil already has perlite mixed in, and I only need a tiny bit just to top off these roots here. So I'm not gonna go crazy on mixing the perlite in, because it's fine with what it has already in here. And I'm just using Miracle-Gro standard potting mix, nothing too extravagant. And then I'm going to go ahead and top it off with a little bit of water mixed with Newt. I am only gonna wet the soil that I just put on top and the soil that is around the new cuttings that I just transplanted into the soil. So there we have her. Once she gets some new growth and gets her little white marble variegation, she'll look so beautiful. All right, so that one is done. Next, I think I am going to pot up my Tradescantias in this elongated pot. I really like the way that they are gonna look. First of all, with the color of this, I think the purple is gonna look really nice against it. And I think it'll look pretty eventually having a whole trail of these on the top, kind of just spilling over to the front side. So that's the look I'm going for. Right now, I am going to start out with just a little bunch that I already propagated. Tradescantias propagate very, very easily and very, very quickly. There's nodes all the way along the stem, kind of as if a pothos would be. But because their nodes are so close together, you don't really have to cut at any specific spot. I would just cut a branch off, pick off the bottomest leaves, and then go ahead and stick that in your water. You can also stick it in soil and keep it moist till you see new growth, because then you know your roots have been developing. Or, and as well as for pothos, you can use the pin method, where you kind of just bring the branches back up and pin them down into the soil and then mist them so they stay wet. And that wet contact with the stem and the soil will then grow roots, and then once they're down in there, you can just cut it away from the mother plant. And that's another really easy, quick way that you can propagate these as well. These propagated once I had put them in water. They started already forming roots within the first week, but I've had these in water for probably like a month and a half now. I should have potted them up a little while ago, but I didn't. So here we are, and I will show you these massive roots. These branches do get very, very delicate though. That is the only thing. So you do have to be very careful, because it's so easy to snap one. So look at, I mean, this is a lot of roots. It looks like it's like just one, they're so entangled. So I'll just quick show you the foliage. It's really pretty, and in the light you kind of get like the way the light reflects off of it, it does start to look a little iridescent and have a little shimmer to it. So these are really pretty and easy care plants. I have mine, my mother plant, in a north facing window. So it receives, you know, not too much light. It doesn't get anything harsh. It doesn't get anything direct. And as you know, if it's in a north facing window, it also does not get light all day long. So it is really a a low light tolerant plant. And aside from that, these are very fast growers. When I first propagated these initial stems, they were probably maybe about this big from my fingers up, with 3 or 4 leaves on them. And as you can see, they're already getting extremely long, and it's only been a month and a half. Now, this does not have drainage. It does have rocks in the bottom of the soil. So although these aren't that particular or picky, you do want to be careful not to overwater, because, you know, eventually, in extreme cases with too prolonged of overwatering, you will start to affect even the easiest plants. Now this, I don't ever let her dry out completely. I would probably water her every time the top inch or 2 of the soil starts to dry out. Now of course that's in the growing season, and in the dormant season, colder months, winter, fall, I do water her a little bit less, but she's not picky whatsoever. Again, I'm just going to top this off, just the soil around the roots and maybe a little bit around. That way the dry soil doesn't kind of suck the water out of where I need it to be. But this is a really pretty plant. This is one thing you do want to remember to do with this guy though. You do with this girl. She's a girl. All my plants are girls. But for her, you do want to remember to rotate, because if you leave her facing one side only to the sun and the other side away from the light, especially if she's in a location like mine is, a north facing window, where she is not getting a lot of bright light around the whole day, she will start to kind of grow to one side, be a little bald. She will get really leggy, and if you do notice that, like I said, you can always chop it, stick it back into the top, water propagate it and whatnot, and that will kind of give it a more bushier look. When you do cut, they tend to branch out, so let me just show you one here. It's going to be kind of hard to see because I don't want to break her since she's a little so delicate, but if you can see this one right here, she branched out since I cut her. She actually branched out on the propagation as well as the original stem I cut her from. But they branch out when you cut them, so if you want a more bushier look rather than that vining look, you can get that as well with this amazing colorful plant. So now that Tradescantia zebrina is finished, I think we will go ahead and pot up this Pilea peperomioides. So now these are also pretty easy care plants. I do have another one of these. This is actually a baby, but I have another one that has, I think, 2, maybe even a 3rd baby currently growing on it. 2 of them I know are ready to be removed, so that will be a video to look out for sometime in the near future. But these grow babies, so you'll see them coming off. Sometimes you won't see them necessarily connected to the main stem because they'll branch off under the soil and come up. But they're really easy to remove. Just as if you would like kind of pull a leaf off, you would use that same gesture in removing the pups. But just be a little more careful, and if you do have to get in there with like shears or a sharp knife, make sure it's sterile and make sure your cut is nice and clean, so that way you don't take away from the mother plant. So I'm going to pot this one in this glass jar. Now this also does not have any drainage, but for this plant as well, it won't really matter. Pileas kind of like to stay on the wetter side. And when I say wetter side, I don't mean sopping wet where it's continuously soggy soil, but they do appreciate to be a little more moist, and they don't like to ever dry out completely. So as long as I'm careful with how I water and I don't put too much water in at one time, she should be pretty fine. So I'm going to just add in a little bit of soil into this glass jar. And then I'm going to add a little bit of perlite in here and mix it up. Now this does already have a little bit of perlite already amended in here, but I'm going to give it a little extra, especially because I don't have any drainage in this pot. So I'm about maybe a quarter the way full with soil, so I'm only going to sprinkle a small handful in there because the soil that I have her currently already potted in does have perlite already mixed in as well. So that's what I'm working with. I don't want it too heavy. That gives it a little bit of aeration, a little bit of drainage, but yet still hold on to a lot of that moisture. I'm going to just carefully squeeze the sides to pull her out. And I might even be able to show you, I'll show you guys the root system on her. I will break off the soil. Now anytime I repot, transplant, pot up for the first time, I always, if I can, make sure I check out the roots. And you always want to remove any dead or rotting or decaying roots, as well as any foliage. Parts of the plants that are dying or rotting, whether they're leaves or roots or stems, the plant goes into panic mode because it thinks it's dying completely, and it sends all of its energy to that one specific place. So because it's focusing energy on parts that we know it can't regenerate or rejuvenate and fix them, it enables them from then using their energy for new growth. So it's always good to remove any of that negative rotting stuff. So we have a little root system on this little gal. And like I said, so the stem goes down to here. So you'll see the pups shoot off from the side of this stem and eventually peek up through the soil. This one's a baby herself, so she won't have any pups probably for at least a few months yet. So now I'm just gonna pour the rest of her soil in. And then I want to make sure she's in there, but I don't want to compact her too tight, especially because I do not have any drainage in this pot or in this jar. But I really like the look of this little glass pink little jar pot. It's cute. Another tip for repotting, you always want to leave a good ½ inch to an inch from the top, because when you water, if it's too close to the top, it will just pour over the sides and you'll have a mess everywhere. It's not fun to clean up. Now, although for this I only used perlite and soil, you could throw a tiny bit of orchid bark in here or cocoa coir, something that will give it a little more aeration but also hold in a little more of that moisture. Again, I'm going to give this a good watering. And she's done. This is also another one, just like Tetrata scantia, that you do want to rotate. As you can see, she's not tilted to one side because of the way I potted her up. She was like this in her original pot. I do try to rotate her. I have her currently in a south-facing window, but there are trees in front of it, so it's not too harsh. It would be the same as having a plant in a south-facing window but having shears over it. She does sit right up in the window on a table that sits directly in front of a south-facing window. And then I do have the mother plant in a very bright room with a north-facing window, a east-facing window, and a south-facing window. But she is pulled back a few feet from all three of those windows, but because it is a big open room, it does get a lot of light, and that one actually does really well there. She is growing. She is like a prolific grower. She's growing so much. So these do prefer a little bit brighter light, but they will tolerate a lower light. They'll just grow a little slower for you, but don't forget to rotate. Next, I am going to add into my Enjoy Pothos. Now this is the one, if you saw, I have a video where I split my parent plant up and potted up a plant for my mother. So she wants hers to be a little more full. So I took some propagations from my mother plant as well. And now we're going to stick them into the top. Look at that, we got a Christmas cactus in there. Now, actually, because this broke, since we're repotting and talking about propagation, because this broke nice and clean, you can actually stick this in dirt and it will root up. Those are actually really easy to root in soil. So I'm going to pick out a couple of the dead leaves that I see just laying on the top of the soil. Now this has a lot of new growth coming in. We have a growth point right here coming in, and then another little growth point under here, as well as, you know, at every tip that's currently growing. And there are some spaces where this plant is actually branching off from other nodes. Let me find an example, because I've read that like it's hard, like it's not often that this happens on a pothos, but my parent pothos, this pothos, and my standard green pothos are all branching off. And I noticed that this started happening when I started feeding them with new plant food. I'm not sure if that has anything to do with it or not, but it's so crazy. So you can see here that that's not an aerial root, that's actually new growth that is going to come out of there as a leaf and then another vine. So this will then have two vines. It's happening there. It's happening at the node above that one right here. And it's happening right here where it's actually missing a leaf. And then you can also see at the bottom of the stem, it is still growing new leaves. So it's going to branch off on that one stem in multiple places, which is eventually going to look crazy. All right, so let's get this one unwrapped. Now, I already cleaned all these roots. I cleaned all the leaves and I wrapped them, as you see, in wet paper towels till I was ready to pot them up. This one, they have pretty decent sized roots. They're definitely able to be potted up. As you saw with the Marble Queen, when you leave them too long, they start to yellow, and also it's harder for them to take to the soil. So real quick before I pot these in there, I'll just explain how you propagate a pothos. This also works for a bunch of other plants that have internodes, with nodes on either side and leaves that sprout out like a pothos does. So most philodendrons, monsteras, and off at the top of my head, Syndapsis, so plants like that. So basically you would want to cut where a leaf is. That's where a node is on these plants, and you'll notice it because sometimes you'll see a little aerial root poking out. which looks like that right above my finger. So you want to cut on either side, and you want to stick the part closest to the plant. That's what will go in the water or in the soil. Now you want to leave maybe about a 1/4 inch. You don't want to have too much stem because most of it will rot away if there is too much. So that could affect the way it roots, and you'll eventually have to just snip it off anyways. So I would say leave yourself a 1/4 inch on the side that's closest to the plant, and that's the side that again would go in the water or in the soil. I've tried to propagate like whole vines before. They didn't really take too well. I think they had too many leaves to handle focusing energy to the roots, you know, to growing roots to keep the leaves alive. So I recommend doing 1 leaf or 2 leaf or maybe even 3 leaf cuttings. But I really wouldn't go much more than that because like I said, too many leaves, it doesn't have enough energy to keep those alive, to photosynthesize properly and grow roots at the same time. So I'm going to actually get this a little moist beforehand because I think it would just be easier for me to get them in there. And then I'm just gonna make a hole, stick those in, and again I will top off with some fresh soil, and then I'll just give that fresh soil a little bit of water as well. As you saw, I just used the bottom of a spoon to make the holes. Now you could spread these out. I am putting them just all in the same area. For me, I'm just working on area by area by area of these plants, and eventually they will fill out. So that's how I'm doing it, and that's mostly because I already have an established plant in here, but if I didn't, I'd probably spread it out a little more just so it would look a little nicer and not like I have this big pot with a plant only in this little corner. But however you want to do it, you know, eventually you could have more adding to it. And actually, if you wanted to air layer the stems, like I said, the bobby pin method or the plant pin method, whatever you would like to use, you could just take the vine, wrap it around in the soil, pin it down, and mist it daily, and that will eventually grow roots as well. That actually works really well. Pothos are pretty one of the easiest, I think, plants out there. They're not picky with soil, they're not picky with sunlight, they're not picky with water. Now, any plant, if you water it too much, whether it's picky or not, it will eventually rot. But with that being said, this one would take a little more time before it would get to that stage. You can really use any type of medium that you want. And they, you know, they do well in low light, they do well in medium light, and they do well in bright light. The only thing I would stay away from is direct sun. And of course, although they can handle that low light, they will grow better in a medium or a bright light situation. So that's just something to be mindful of. And as I mentioned with the rest of these, I will keep this side where the cuttings that I just took out of water will be. I will keep that a little more moist than the rest of the pot for the next week or so. But again, if you use a little bit of that micronizal inoculant, that will really help with its acclimating to growing in soil rather than how it was in water. All right, so next I have a couple cuttings. I think all I have left is the cuttings that I want to put in leca, And then I have this very, very sad string of bananas cutting that I want to put into this. Actually, I'm going to put this in a terracotta pot since it's a succulent. And the terracotta pot is very porous. It will suck the water out and help them dry out a little bit faster. Now how this got like this, as you see, there's only those 2 little leaves that have just grown in at the top there. This did start out as a pretty great cutting, and it was rooting really nicely. What happened was I left it in the water too long, and just as the marble queen pothos started to yellow, succulents can't handle that, so it started to kind of just crisp up. So I didn't want to throw it away or waste it because I know it will be fine. So if I just stick it in with these, it will eventually make that little plant more full, and you know, it will continue to grow. So I don't need any more soil, so I'm just going to carefully get these out of here and just switch them into this pot. Now this is one that you don't, it's all in my lap. You don't really need to keep this one moist because it is a succulent, but I will just get it moist for this first time transplanting it since it was just in water, and then I will leave it alone to do its thing. How I know when these need to be watered is I take the leaves and I just kind of squeeze them, and if I can't tell that way, then I'll take like a longer leaf and I will squeeze them like the long way, and if they bend the tiniest bit where you can kind of see a wrinkle then form in them, then I know that they need to be watered because they're really firm. So once they lose that firmness, that's how you know when a succulent is no longer holding on to the water and could use a fill-up. So that's this little one. Looks so sad. But I'm going to again make more cuttings. This was just one that broke off, so I rooted it and figured I'd stick it in here with these 2. But now that I have a whole nother plant, I will take a few more and I will pot them up. This is another one just like the pothos that you could wrap the strands around and pin them down and mist them, and that water with the contact with the soil will then create the roots, as well as cut them and stick them back into the top, and then those you will have to mist and keep a little moist until they start to develop roots. Succulents, especially the string of bananas, string of pearls, string of hearts, they can handle a little higher light, even some direct sunlight. I wouldn't leave them in direct sun for more than a couple hours at a time though, because then you could get into that burning. And we don't want to crisp them. We just want them to get the light that they need. So last but not least, I have two types of, I have a pothos and I have a philodendron that I just want to throw into some leca, and then that will finish off this video. Now I have my mother plant of both of these growing in soil. So I'm excited to see the difference of growth between the 2 mediums. I recently, well now it's been a little while, but I transplanted it in a video as well. So if you're not sure on how to grow in leca, you can check out my semi-hydroponic playlist. But I transplanted some of my Hoyas into leca, and they are doing very, very well. And then I stuck them in a grow tent, and they are just like spurting with new growth everywhere. So these are 4-inch net pots. I'm going to fill them maybe almost a third of the way with some leca. especially for this standard green pothos, because it does have a really extensive root system going on here. Again, you can see the yellowing in some of the leaves because I left these in a little bit more than I should have. But look how nice those roots are. I mean, they're crazy. So this could probably actually handle maybe a 5-inch pot, maybe even a 6-inch pot. But for now, I'm gonna keep her in the 4-inch, see how she does. And once she starts to vine out and spread out her roots, then I'll transfer her maybe into a 5 or a 6-inch pot. You can, again, propagate pothos in soil and water, and now that I am potting into leca, you can actually propagate these in leca as well. You can do that by either just sticking them in leca and, you know, filling the water 1/3 of the way of your tray as you normally would grow them, or you could stick them in leca and fill the water all the way to the top, which is what I do when I propagate in leca. And then I don't use any nutrients until they grow, like show new growth, have a root system, and all that good stuff. Now, these will like a pH level between 5.5 and 6.5. And I do feed these. I wouldn't necessarily say feed. I provide them with nutrients with the Micro Flora, Micro Bloom, and Micro Grow series, along with a little Super Thrive and New as well. And they do really well. At least my Hoyas have, and a few of my other plants that I have growing hydroponically or semi-hydroponically. So I'm sure this pothos is really going to thrive in leca. And I'm really excited to see. This is the mother plant of this one. That's the one that I mentioned was branching off everywhere along 2 of the vines and multiple nodes. So I'm excited to see if this one does the same thing and how fast this one grows. Now, when this does start to acclimate, I will then go ahead and take off all the yellowing leaves, but I don't want to stress it too much right now. But that's definitely something I will do once it acclimates to growing in leca. If they were rotting or completely dead, I would remove them right now, but because they're only just starting to yellow, they won't pull too much of that positive energy away from the plant. So now for the last plant, I have a Philodendron Brazil. So that's your standard heart-shaped leaf philodendron with your little green, white, silverish stripe down the middle. And these get really pretty. My mother plant of this one is just starting to really thrive, and it's really starting to get some long vines growing, and I'm really extremely excited to as well see the difference of the growth habits between these plants in soil and in leca. And this is another one that again has that really extensive root system. These, both of these have probably been rooting for about 1.5 to 2 months. They really did root pretty quickly and easily. I root all my plants in newt and water. I don't use any other fertilizers, especially to root in, because I've tried that once before and the plants just died. I feel like it was too much of an overload for them. Now that may work for some other people, but for me that didn't work out. Newt has been working really well for all of my plants with rooting as well as overall growth. So that's what I stick to. This one is again in that same bright lit room with the east, north, and south facing window, but it's actually up between two east facing windows. It's up higher, so I do have a grow light hanging on the ceiling, shining down onto it to provide it with a little bit of the light that it's missing. And it's really, ever since I put the grow light there, it started to shoot out some of those long vines that I was just speaking about. This one, I'm not sure where I'm going to place her. Probably on my, I have a little table where I have all my propagations and, you know, some of my plants that I'm growing and all that. And that's right in front of that south facing window. So I'll probably put her there for a little bit. I was considering my grow tent, but I feel like that's too high of a humidity for this. And although these ones aren't really that picky, it could probably handle it. I don't want to overdo it because the humidity does stay a little higher in there. So again, with the yellow leaves, I will remove those once this plant acclimates in a week or two. But she looks cute in Leca. Now the ones in Leca, I will stick in a saucer and fill their water up to about here. And when I first pot my cuttings into Leca, I still don't use any of those nutrients for about the first week. And then I give them half of the regular dosage for the second week. And then that's when I start giving them their regular amount of nutrients that I give all my other plants that I'm growing semi-hydroponically. Thank you guys again for joining me in another video. I hope this repot was something that interests you. I hope you learned something about one of these plants that I repotted and give you a little insight and information on how to grow them, how to care for them, and how to propagate and repot them. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you're interested in the content I provide. And as always, every plant's a princess.